Welcome to A Bit of Poetry with Dr. O, a podcast about poetry, not primarily about poets, not primarily about poetics, but primarily where we explore poems. And the poem that I've chosen for this beautiful fall morning, you can probably tell by the mist coming from me that it's quite chilly on this autumn morning. The poem that I've chosen for this morning is To a Waterfowl by William Cullen Bryant. I've chosen a series of poems for this broadcast and for the ones that follow that mostly have to do with fall or things that we think about in the fall. And so often in the fall we will sometimes see a flock of waterfowl flying over. And well, William Cullen Bryant, the poet who wrote this poem, To a Waterfowl, saw just one waterfowl flying over, and it caused him to muse into these thoughts that resulted in this poem, which I identify as my favorite short poem in the English language. So I chose it first for the same reason that I sometimes eat dessert first at a meal, so that just in case I die, the best part will be over with before the rest of the meal. So, William Cullen Bryant, To a Waterfowl. Now what I plan to do with this poem is to explain it so that people who do not understand poetry might be able to understand what is being said here. And then at the conclusion of the podcast, just read the whole thing over so that you can feel the music of it. So a bit at a time now, To a Waterfowl. Whither, midst falling dew, while glow the heavens with the last steps of day, far through their rosy depths dost thou pursue thy solitary way. Now, if you're like I am, when I first started reading poetry, you hear something like that and you say, what in the wide world is he saying? And one of the features of poetry is that the poet uses very emotional language and he uses it in a very concise way. So poetry is different from prose or non-poetry writing in that the poet deliberately chooses very emotional language and he writes in a very concise way. Good prose is also written very concisely. In English, the poetry also follows a pattern. Most older poetry would follow a way that you could count the number of syllables in each line. We can do it with this one, and if I don't forget, we will in just a few minutes, to see that each stanza of this poem and each line in each stanza has the exact same number of syllables. But if you were just going to try to translate this into another language, which is very difficult to do, good poetry, because it is so language specific, rarely translates well into another language, and the translator himself needs to be a poet to do it well. Then you might translate this first stanza, "Hey duck, where are you going so late in the day?" But that really communicates a different emotion than what we have here. Whither, midst falling dew. So he doesn't say it's late in the day, he says it's falling dew, so we know it's in the evening. Whither, where, while it's late in the evening, while glow the heavens with the last steps of day. So he paints a picture with his words. We begin to see that it's a beautiful sunset. And then he furthers the description of the sunset in the next line when he says, far through their rosy depths dost thou pursue thy solitary way. So the waterfowl is by itself. We don't know if it's a goose or a duck or a swan. We don't really care. Not relevant. It's a waterfowl that is by itself and it is migrating. And so since it is the fall of the year, then we are going to assume that duck is flying south for the winter, where it's going to meet with a lot of its fellow waterfowl and raise young. But this first stanza is late in the day. He sees a waterfowl. Where are you going? And then he, in the next stanza, describes that this waterfowl is flying so far away that there's no danger of a waterfowl hunter getting it. Vainly the fowler's eye might mark thy distant flight to do thee wrong, as painted darkly on a crimson sky thy figure floats along. I think that William Cullen Bryant probably composed the second two lines of this stanza first. Painted darkly on the crimson sky, thy figure floats along, and loved it so much that he then had to struggle with something that, what can I get to complement that? And so he came up with the two lines, vainly the fowler's eye might mark thy distant flight to do thee wrong. So you're too far up for a duck hunter to shoot you. But I think what he really wanted to get here was silhouetted against the sky, he can see the dark form of this waterfowl making its way south. And he continues to talk to the waterfowl. So the whole poem is addressed to the waterfowl. And he says in this third stanza, seek'st thou the plashy brink of weedy lake or marge of river wide? So he's like, where are you going? Are you looking for a weedy lake where you can hear the water just kind of gently splashing? Only he uses the word plashy. Or the banks of a wide river? Maybe he's going to the ocean, which he mentions in this next. Or where the rocking billows rise and sink, so that would be the waves of the ocean, rising and sinking on the chafed ocean side. Now remember, I said a few minutes ago that especially older poetry in English will try to get the same number of syllables in each line. And that's why I pronounced the word chafed, C-H-A-F-E-D, with 2 syllables, because we needed an extra syllable in that line. And that's the way William Cullen Bryant intended us to read it. But let's count the syllables. So we're in the third stanza. By the way, if you have not done so already, I urge you to click the link that goes to a copy of this poem. The poem will be so much more meaningful to you if you can follow along while I'm explaining it. But let's count the syllables in this stanza. Any one of the stanzas would do, but since we're on the third one, let's count it. Seek'st, not seekest, seek'st thou the plashy brink, 6 syllables, of weedy lake or marge of river wide, 10 syllables, so we've got 6, 10. Or where the rocking billows rise and sink, 10 syllables, on the chafed ocean side, 7. And then if you count the syllables in each line of each one of these stanzas, you'll find that they either exactly match or nearly exactly match that same pattern. Sometimes a poet will put in an extra syllable, and there are special terms for how that happens, but we're not worried about that today. Continuing with the poem, so he says, there is a power whose care teaches thy way along that pathless coast. So perhaps you have sometimes wondered, how can a migrating bird find its way to where it's supposed to go? That's the idea that the poet is expressing here. And he's saying, there is a power. You can see if you have the poem up that the word power is capitalized. So he's talking about God. So there is a power whose care teaches thy way along that pathless coast. The desert and illimitable air, lone wandering but not lost. So the waterfowl is by itself. He's lone wandering, but he is not lost. That's one of my favorite lines in the poem. I think it would be a great title for a book, wouldn't it? Maybe I'll write an autobiography one day and call it Lone Wandering but Not Lost. In the next stanza, he expresses his wonder that the bird can fly so hard for so long. All day thy wings have fanned at that far height the cold, thin atmosphere, yet stoop not, weary, to the welcome land, though the dark night is near. So even though it's almost night, the bird continues to fly very arduously towards its goal. And what is that goal? The next stanza says, and soon that toil shall end. So you're flying so hard, soon you'll be at the place where you need to go, and you'll be able to rest. Soon shalt thou find a summer home and rest, and scream among thy fellows. Reeds shall bend soon o'er thy sheltered nest. Now the word scream seems to carry with it a little bit of a scary idea with it. But if you have ever been around a whole lot of nesting waterfowl, then you know that scream is just exactly the right word. They make so much noise. I've been in Arkansas when the snow geese have come down and descended on fields, and you can hear their racket for miles and miles. And so screaming is a good word. And but he's saying soon you're going to be in the midst, you won't be by yourself anymore. You're going to be amidst thousands of other waterfowl who are making their home. Now the bird has gone, and so he continues to address the bird, even though it's out of sight, saying, "Thou art gone, the abyss of heaven hath swallowed up thy form, yet on my heart deeply hath sunk the lesson thou hast given, and shall not soon depart." So he's saying, you've gone, but in this contemplation that I have had as I've considered you by yourself and where you're going and how God is guiding you, it has left this lesson upon my heart, which he summarizes in the final stanza. He who from zone to zone, so that's God, he who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone, will guide my steps aright. So he feels like, I'm sometimes by myself. He may be going through a solitary time in his life, feel like he's all alone. But this waterfowl has given him the confidence that the same God who guides the waterfowl certainly to his desired haven will also guide him, the poet, to his desired haven. So, without interruption, here is William Cullen Bryant's To a Waterfowl. Whither, midst falling dew, while glow the heavens with the last steps of day, far through their rosy depths dost thou pursue thy solitary way? Vainly the fowler's eye might mark thy distant flight to do thee wrong, as painted darkly on a crimson sky thy figure floats along. Seek'st thou the plashy brink of weedy lake, or marge of river wide, or where the rocking billows rise and sink on the chafed ocean side? There is a power whose care teaches thy way along that pathless coast, the desert and illimitable air, lone wandering, but not lost. All day thy wings have fanned at that far height the cold, thin atmosphere, yet stoop not weary to the welcome land, though the dark night is near. And soon that toil shall end. Soon shalt thou find a summer home and rest, and scream among thy fellows, reeds shall bend soon o'er thy sheltered nest. Thou art gone. The abyss of heaven hath swallowed up thy form, yet on my heart deeply hath sunk the lesson thou hast given, and shall not soon depart. He who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone, will lead my steps aright. This is Dr. O, and a bit of poetry with Dr. O.